So I gave it a quick listen, and well, if you look at the song titles for one, a bit of a big giveaway. I think generally with artists, anything that we're singing about is related to grief, whether it's grief from war or secondary losses or death. I think in this album, I don't know who this album is dedicated to, if it was a band member or a family member, but it spoke to me so much because, he was saying death is not the end. I think in the song Love Letter, 1 minute you're here and the next you're gone, which is very much related to sudden death.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and returning today is a return guest. I guess that was redundant. Return. Uh, but Callsuma was with me back in February. She is a podcaster, and I love talking to her so much. I'm having her back. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Jesse, you all right? Happy to be back. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah. So tell us, for those of you who didn't hear the first episode, tell us a little about yourself and tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, sure. Last month when I appeared, I talked about my podcast Bereavement Room. It's very much a podcast that is about grief and loss from the perspective of Black and Brown communities. We explore everything from mental health to workplace politics to COVID-19 to anticipatory grief to sudden death. I've had 2 seasons already. The third season commences at the beginning of June, and I'm super excited that I've got a third season in the making. Currently interviewing very heavily. And yeah, it's a community podcast, and it's something that I'm very, very proud of because it's very much tied into my own personal experiences. So it's really nice for me to be able to chat with you, Jesse, a little bit about my podcast and grief and loss, which is a massively taboo topic, but in the times that we're living in right now, we do need to start talking about it a bit more openly and making space for it.
And yeah, and I've gone and sampled some episodes, and I find them very. I don't know if inspiring is the right word, but cathartic. In other words, this is not a quote unquote downer podcast. This is all about just the process and things that because everyone grieves a different way. And I think
Mm,
your giving people formats and to talk is empowering people and letting people know that the different ways to grieve is something that you each have to find your own way.
that's it, exactly. It really very much is about holding a space to have meaningful conversations and acknowledging that, yeah, we all grieve differently. I mean, everyone will grieve at one point in their life. Grief is universal, but the narrative around bereavement is not. And I guess the one thing that my podcast Bereavement Room gives to people is that opportunity to be able to have a very unfiltered conversation openly about their experience.
Yeah, and especially one of the things that there was a lot of noise when Bruce did his Jeep commercial for the Super Bowl. And one of the things that people brought up is that they filmed it in a chapel with a Christian church, and that, people of other faiths could have been feel excluded while he's giving a message of the middle. Now, as a 60-year-old white guy who is raised in a Baptist church, converted to Catholicism, I don't see any of that. I
Yeah,
just went, oh, what nice. Bruce is asking us to come together. And I think that is, and I don't want to get too deep, but I think that is something that is always interesting to bring is you view things from your lens. And
that's
not
it.
everyone has that same lens, that same background.
No. No. Look, we all experience the world differently from one another. We all have our unique experience of the world. And I think it's fair to say that we all hold prejudices and biases. And sometimes we're conscious of it and sometimes we're not conscious of it. But it really does come down to your world. I didn't hear that about him holding that event in the church. But I mean, is Bruce religious? Is he Christian? Maybe that's why he did that.
Well, he was raised Catholic, and he talks often that you can't escape that, no matter
Okay.
what.
Mm,
And the premise of the commercial is that in the lower 48 states of the U.S., the absolutely center of that landmass of the 48 states is in a place, and there is a marker saying this is the center of the United States, not including Alaska and Hawaii, right? And
mm,
so, and someone had built a chapel there that is open to all. And so the theme of the podcast, look at me, the commercial was, we need to find a middle ground. We are so we are so divided as a nation, we need to find middle ground. So they use this as a symbolic that this is the center of the country, therefore can we find a middle ground, which offended people on the far right, because how dare Bruce, who's criticized President Trump and has, been horrible speaking against his policies, dare how now he wants to go to middle ground. And then the far left, it criticized them because how dare you ask us to go in the middle, because these are people who are racist and people who want to stop people from voting and want to stop a woman from choose and oh, by the way, you mentioned the ground you're sitting on was actually stolen from Native Americans. So
yeah,
the,
yeah.
uh, someone tweeted, and I thought it was so true, that um, the reaction to Bruce's commercial about asking us to meet in the middle explains how far away we are from the middle at all.
That's true. That's very, very true. And I would agree completely with that. It will always be a convoluted and complex topic where it will divide people.
Yeah.
And I guess when I think about my podcast, that's the reason why I created Bereavement Room, because I
Hmm.
wasn't welcome in other spaces. So I was like, well, then I need to create my own welcoming space. And it's done pretty well for itself. And I felt empowered by creating my own space because I'm not welcome to speak about my experiences in other spaces. Um, and I mean, with Bruce, is he a Republican? I don't really know what his political
No,
views
he's
are.
he's very left. He is very
Yeah,
liberal.
yeah, I thought
He has
so.
ran.
Yeah,
He has he has done concerts for, he did concerts for Barack Obama, John Kerry, Hillary
yeah,
Clinton. He has his own podcast, a radio show on E Street Radio, and he has um, had horrible things to say about Donald Trump. And in fact, one
yeah.
of the things that I absolutely love is, um, he had a quote early that, with all apologies to our commander in chief, wear a effing mask. Except he did not say effing. And
That was a
so,
sentiment, though.
yes, and it was, he, but all his career, he has talked about, and he has said his songs are about the
Struggle.
the
Yeah,
struggle between the American dream and
that's
the
it.
American reality,
Yeah,
right? And the gap
yeah,
between us. And early in his career, he had said, "No one wins unless everyone wins,"
that's it.
which
Yeah,
which of course immediately, people, oh, you're against capitalism, and you're against, like, no, the idea is, you're the idea is you want to be, let's try to be nice and understanding to each other, right? And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you embrace someone who, wants to stop, you know, who want to put, uh, immigrant kids in prison, in jails and separate parents. No, we don't support that. I had a real good friend try to explain to me once. He said, "Look, I want to go back to where you want safe borders, I want safe borders. We disagree how to do it. Let's figure out how to happen, right?
Mm,
I want the UK economy to be strong. You want the UK economy to be strong. We just disagree how to do it. Let's figure it out,
mm,
right?" And so I
mm,
think that's where, in my mind at least, is middle, which leads me to, how are things going over there? We mentioned a little before I went recorded, here in Texas, I am feeling very strange because our governor this week, as we're recording this, opened up the state. He says every business can have 100%. And by the way, I'm getting rid of the mask mandate. Now, every business, if you still want to have masks, that's fine. And everyone, it's your personal choice. But I no longer believe the government should tell you you have to wear a mask. And I'm going, what are you doing? Only 7% of the state population has been vaccinated.
mm,
Why would you make this? But it's for political reasons, right? He just wants to show, hey, Texas is a freedom loving state versus, trying to do the right thing for our citizens. So it's
mm.
crazy.
Mm. And it could also be for reasons of money because let's face it, the economy's lost a lot of money during
Yes.
this pandemic everywhere in the world, in every country. It's hit people so, so hard. And so they want to make a risky decision, let's go back as soon as possible. Let's not wear a mask. Or I'm a politician. I want you to see that I'm doing something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just crazy. So,
Yeah.
but are you and yours doing well?
Great question. Not really.
Oh
Like,
no.
like so we've we're still locked down. Businesses haven't. Only essential businesses are open, and schools are closed. Everyone's being homeschooled, but apparently schools are gonna reopen very soon, later this month. But a lot, the British public see schools as a super spreader. And as soon as we reopen schools, we have to then close the country down again. And I guess people are quite fearful that because not all of us have been vaccinated, as you mentioned earlier, for you it's 7%. I don't know what our percentage is. I think it's probably around about the same or lower. That there's just a fear that we're going to reopen too soon, go back to life too soon, and then we're going to be locked down again from September after going on a massive binge during the summer, which is what happened last year. So, there's just a lot happening with the budget being released as well, the new budget about how much longer they can use the furlough scheme. Followed by, now's a good time for people to buy property because, they're giving away 95% mortgages now. And,
Yeah.
stamp duty has been eradicated, whereas before you'd be paying thousands in stamp duty. So now's a great time to buy property. And so they're trying to make the money back, right? That's been lost. So people have got concerns about the budget. Some people are happy about it. Some people aren't happy about it. And then there's this other thing recently where NHS workers, our National Health Service workers, are going on strike because they're not happy with the 1% pay rise.
Hmm.
So a lot going on in the UK and a lot of opinions flying around as usual. The British public always love to speak out on these things. Um, and yeah, just I don't know what the future holds, to be honest. And I just can't see us, working towards this timeline that they've given us realistically, because I do feel we'll be back at square one at some point. Even though the COVID deaths have dropped, I don't know, maybe this is just me being skeptical or fearful or whatnot. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, really. You just have to wait and see.
Well, I'm right there with you because the we are going down too, but that's because we're trying to wear a mask, we're trying to do
Mm,
things, and and I they the local paper showed an article that the flu season was non-existent this year. But because of everything you're doing to stop COVID, also stop the flu. So washing your hands, remembering social distance, wearing a mask. And
Mm.
so, which is, a small ray of sunshine in an otherwise, horrible time. So I know that most of my audience leans toward the left. I mean, there are certainly conservatives who love Bruce's music
Sure.
that also, that support President Trump and are
Yeah.
believe in, believe in a smaller government and a lot of things that the Republican Party supposedly stands for. I'll shut up with that.
Yeah. I think
And so,
that's why I was a bit confused. Is he
yeah,
Democratic or is he Republican? Because I know that a lot of his fans are from the Republican Party.
yeah, and which is funny because right, and we laugh about that, when President Trump was in the hospital, they were playing Born in the
Yes,
USA.
I saw
And it's
that.
like,
Yeah.
okay, this is an anti-war song. I mean, this is not a patriotic song. And by the way, it was so funny. A couple weeks ago, I had a wonderful guest, Catherine, who is a huge Leonard Cohen fan.
Mm,
And we talked for almost an hour and a half about her musical journey and how much she loves Leonard Cohen. And she said, Bruce and him have something in common. One of their most popular songs are misunderstood. She goes, Hallelujah is not a
yeah.
song that people play. They like the night before President Biden was inaugurated, they had a memorial service for all the people that lost in the US. And someone sang Hallelujah. And she's like, it is not the song you would play in a memorial service. It is, but everyone misunderstands it. So that's
Interesting.
just crazy. Yeah. Well, what first off, I always love visiting with you. I just have a blast talking to you, and I hope you know that you have a welcome space here anytime. As
Oh,
you
thank
talked about,
you.
that sometimes, um, you know, and it's true. Sometimes people, we are a very fractured society.
Mm,
If you lean right, you watch Fox News. If you lean left, you watch MSNBC here in the
mm,
U.S.
mm.
But you're always welcome. But specifically, um, Calcimo was here last time, and I mentioned that I said you should check out Bruce's latest album, Letter to You, because I think it has a lot of themes of grief in it. And you
Mm.
said, okay, I will. And it seemed like almost immediately. I know it wasn't that quick, but you sent me a DM in Twitter and said, oh my gosh, I've listened to this album and it's totally about grief.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
completely.
okay, do you want to come back and talk about it? And you said, I'd love to. So kind of take it from there and we'll have a discussion.
Yeah, sure. So I gave it a quick listen, and well, if you look at the song titles for one, a bit of a big giveaway. I think generally with artists, anything that we're singing about is related to grief, whether it's grief from war or secondary losses or death. I think in this album, I don't know who this album is dedicated to, if it was a band member or a family member, but it spoke to me so much because, he was saying death is not the end. I think in the song Love Letter, 1 minute you're here and the next you're gone, which is very much related to sudden death.
Yes.
Um, and I that really spoke to me because obviously my dad's death was a sudden death, and I was like, oh my gosh, she was, you're happy as Larry 1 minute, minding your own business, and then the next, bam, your world is turned upside down. And I just felt like with those lyrics in that song, 1 minute you're here and the next you're gone, it just really spoke to my heart. And I was like, oh my gosh, this album is so much about grief. As I was working through all of the songs and having a listen, it's just so sad and poetic. I also feel like the timing as well. So he released it in 2020, right?
Yeah. So to give you a little bit, so it in 2019, a the he was in a band in high school called the Castiles,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and he said that he had remained friends with those guys, and he was at the bedside of George, and I can't remember George's last name. I should look this up. But anyway, and he passed. He passed away. Not there necessarily where Bruce was there, but did. And all of a sudden, Bruce realized he was the only person left alive from that band he was into in high
Oh,
school.
wow. Wow.
And then the other story he told is um, he was doing his Broadway show, and one night, he says and just to share, Callsuma, people would line up before the show and after the show, and he would sign things, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so after the
That's nice.
show, he was walking out, and this guy handed him a guitar, and Bruce said, "Oh, you want me to sign this?" No, no, this is yours.
Oh.
I and it was from Italy. The guy was from Italy. Um, and so Bruce, put the guitar in the car, and he said, a little bit later he picked it up, and it was a really beautiful guitar. He said, "Well done, just beautiful, great sound." And he started strumming it, and he started thinking about losing his bandmates, and he had lost Clarence several years ago, and Danny, and
Okay.
songs started coming, right?
So he's the last man standing.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that's where the band came from. And then the other thing that I found fascinating is historically, over the past several years when they've recorded, Bruce would go in the studio and make a demo of the songs where he would play all the instruments. And then
Mm.
when the E Street Band came to play, he would play the demo. And as one of them said, we play beat the demo, right? Like he's already got the song done. Now we've got to do it better than what he did.
Mm.
And so someone asked, "Hey, Bruce, can we not do that? Can you just, can we start it from fresh?" So there was a beautiful documentary on Apple TV of him. And so all the band is sitting around with their reading glasses on and yellow pads and pens, and he's playing the song just with a guitar, and they're all writing. And
Mm.
then they sat there, and so over 3 days, they recorded most of the album.
Oh, wow. Wow. And that's a short
Yes.
period of time to complete an album.
Yes. And and I do think that all of the songs um you know are, it is kind of interesting that and a lot of people talked about um that, is this kind of him saying goodbye, right? But I've
Mm.
heard other people go that no, this is just it's kind of a, where we are currently with our career, and where are we going to go next, right?
Mm.
So I do agree, though, that well, let me ask you: do you think it's a sad album, or do you find it a hopeful album?
I think it's a very sad, poetic album.
Okay.
Um, that's what I heard as I was listening to it. But I mean, it's a love letter. And, people write love letters all the time. In fact, in therapy, when someone has died, just coming back to death, um, they always say, "Have you thought about writing a letter to the person that died?" Even though you can't post it off to them and they'll never read it. It's meant to be cathartic, as you said earlier. There's different cathartic things that you can do. I mean, it to me, when I listen to that album, it just I hear something poetic and cathartic about the way that those songs have been written, and the tone in his voice. So I mean, that's just how I interpreted it. That it is a love letter in that sense, whether it's related to the death of his mates and him being the last one standing, and also what to do going forwards with their career, because there's still grief related to that as well.
Yes.
We all grieve, even in job losses and job changes and transitions, and it's so closely related to the death of prior bandmates. So It's sad. I think it is a poetic, sad piece of work.
You know, in the letter to you, which was the very first single, he
Mm,
talked about, in my letter to you, I took all my fears and doubts. In my letter to you, all the hard things that I found out. In my letter to you, all that I found true. And I sent it in my letter to you.
mm.
And I do think that's very, we discussed it as, fans, like, well, is that a letter to the fans? Is that a letter to the people that he's lost? And I think it's a little bit of both, right? I
Could
think,
be.
yeah, where, he is saying, um, and, I'm especially, uh, the final song, I'll See You in My Dreams.
Oh, I love that song.
Yeah, it is, um, you know, and it's funny. Um, Later today, I'm going to meet with my buddies and we're going to talk about the final episode of WandaVision, right? This is the Marvel cinema with Scarlet Witch and everything.
Yeah.
And no spoilers in case someone hasn't seen it, but there's a very poignant ending. And and it I'm sitting there and I'm thinking of, I'll see you in my dreams where all summers have come to an end. I'll see you in my dreams, we'll meet and live and love again. I'll see you in my dreams, yet up around the river bend, for death is not the end, and I'll see
Mm,
you in my dreams.
mm.
I'm gonna sound like fanboy,
Well,
but if
you
you
are.
yeah,
It's
but
all
if you
right.
to to be able to write even one song that's that in depth, it's just
Absolutely.
amazing, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I mean, I think these interpretations are subjective anyway, but I feel like with I'll see you in my dreams, to me, that's something that I think about when I think of my dad now, because I
Yes.
I see him in my dreams now. I do. That's when I see him because
Yes.
he's no longer walking this earth, so I do see him in my dreams, and that's all I can hope for. And yeah, because of faith and religion, which I think he touched on in one of his songs, the
Yeah.
power of prayer, that if you do come from a belief system, death isn't the end.
Right.
So to be able to create all of that in such a short space amount of time, really impressive, but it must have come from somewhere, because when our creative juices are flowing, that's not manufactured, that's like right there on the spot, epiphany type thing.
It is, and I think also that for those who do not have a faith, that people are either agnostic or atheist.
Mm.
Um, I also think in a lot of ways death is not the end, because as long as you remember them, they're part of your life,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so I think that absolutely, being raised the way I do, you do think, okay, I will not only see you in my dreams, but I will see you um,
In the next life.
in the next life. Absolutely. Whatever
Mm.
that means, whatever that's going to be. And to have this touching method, I'm truly looking forward to hearing them do it live. you
Mm.
know, because I think earlier in the song, right, he says, I got your guitar here by my bed, all your favorites and all the books that you read. Now, I don't know, but I'm sure there are things of your father that are there at your home that help you think of him all the time, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I kept quite a few of his belongings. I wear some of his jumpers sometime because I find that comforting. So
Yeah.
whether you have a belief system or not, I've got friends that are atheist and agnostic, and when it's Christmas, they'll lay out a seat for that person, because it's not the end when someone lives on in your memory. Love lives on. So they'll mark it in little ways like that, where they'll have a toast at Christmas, or they'll go to that person's favorite place, or cook that person's favorite food. So death isn't the end, and we do this in all different ways. Whether we have a belief system about the afterlife or not, it's a unique and individual experience. And with my dad, he left behind he wasn't extravagant. He didn't have any big tastes or anything, but he always had this watch that he wore on his wrist, right? And I always knew that if he passed away, that watch would come to me. But it was just quite symbolic of him and who he was, because he really liked a good watch, like a decent watch.
Hmm.
And it's comforting for me to wear it, and it's
Sure.
comforting for me to wear his jumper. Some people might find that strange, but my dad was into his jumpers,
Sure.
and I wanted to keep a few because it's just the smell and the feeling that it gives me, and it keeps me closer to my dad, knowing that he's no longer here. And I know I can't be the only one. Many people have
Oh,
things. Like, what do you have? I mean, you must have a few things that
I
bring you
do.
comfort.
I have a small little penknife, little small little pocket knife that was my grandmother's that she carried all
Mm,
the time, and I carry that. I have. What's funny is after my father died, um, I asked mom. I said, "Do you?" I said, "Do we have a guitar of dad's?" And she goes, "Yeah, yeah, here's a guitar." And so for the long, and I don't play the guitar. I've always wanted to learn, but I just never have taken the time.
aw.
And so for the longest time, I had the guitar in the living room. And when my son uh, moved out, he had moved back in, and then with COVID, and so he just got a his own apartment a few months ago. And he
Mm,
said, "Dad, do you mind if I bring Gramps' guitar to the house?" And I'm like, "No, I don't mind at all." I said, I think that's perfect. That it was your grandfather's, then it was mine, and now it's yours." And so we have, we have paintings that my grandmother had done, and just recently, my mom um, said, "All the albums I own are going to be yours anyway.
aw.
So why don't I go ahead and let you have them?" So, so the line says all your favorite records and the books you have read. And my mother is a wonderful reader, just like I am.
Mm,
And we exchange books all the time. And so even though she's still here, I know that, when I lose her, these records will mean the world to me, that I have those from
absolutely.
her. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I think others, I know that my wife had her father's rosary, and
Mm,
she kept that in her purse. And then she has, jewelry of her mom's that she wears.
mm.
And the other thing that she always says, she bought a wind chime, you know, and she put it up on the back porch. And she says every time it rings, she says it's her mom talking to her.
Oh, that's so lovely. I love that.
Yes.
I love that.
And so we'll be outside and it'll get very wingy and you'll hear the ching, 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 ding, ding. And she goes, "Boy, mom's really talking today." And so and I think the important message, and I'm sure you talk about this, is the sadness never goes away, but you become a new normal.
Mm,
That,
yeah.
that, um, and I don't know about you, Calcima, but there is probably not a week go by where I don't think, "Wow, I should call dad." And oh, wait, he, I can't call dad.
That's it.
Or we lost a very good friend several years ago that is our age, and Rick, and probably 3 4 times a year we will start talking about it. And
Mm.
Chris knew him, all his life. That's my son, and we'll talk about it. He says, "Man, I'd love to talk to Rick. I just would love to get his advice, and I'd love to hear that fool's thoughts." And so um, I I'm sure you think about your dad all the time.
Oh yeah, always, always. And when I want advice or I want to tell him some good news or did you hear this? I want to be able to pick up the phone. In fact, it's interesting you talk about that, because I haven't deleted my dad's phone number, from my phone book, even though I know the line is dead. Sometimes I'll randomly just call the landline number, my old household number, to, I don't know why, I know my dad's gone, but I'll still call the number and it just kind of reconfirms that he did actually die.
Yes.
And most people might think that I should delete the number, but my dad was someone that called me a lot, and we had a
Mhm.
lot of conversations, whether it was face to face or on the telephone. He was my best friend, and even as time goes by, you just carry it with you differently. You're still carrying that loss, and you still carry that every day of when you hit a milestone or something's happened, or you maybe have cooked some kind of meal that your dad would have liked, or
Yes.
if I'm eating a bag of fish and chips by the seaside, I know that that's something that me and my dad did a lot when I was growing up, and he loved a bag of chips, and my dad will always surface in my memory every day in any of my daily activities, whatever I'm doing. And it's it's like a gift, I guess, in a sense that I've realized as I've gotten older that I go to less weddings and to more funerals,
Yes.
and that's sad, but it just keeps me more grounded of the reality of life, really, and what's meaningful. And I do think about my dad all the time, and I just think that, when I was younger, I didn't want all these old paintings or any of my dad's jumpers or anything like that, because, he was alive and stuff.
Yeah.
But these things are so important to me now. Like you talked about the rosary beads. So we also have like a version of the rosary beads as well in like Islamic prayer that we use.
Hmm.
And my mum left some beads behind as well, which I have hanging on my door. So it's just wherever you look, wherever you turn, for me, my parents are always with me, and I am really grateful for the things that I do have. I know they're just things, but they just remind me of who my parents were, whether it is beads or a watch or a jumper. It's with me as I go along, as I carry this loss.
So one of the very odd things I have is my grandfather ran a dairy farm,
Oh
and
yeah.
he was a farmer, and so he was very handsy. He did a lot of work, and have to
Mm.
put up fences and build trains and fix the barn and things like that. So I have his tape measure. My mom said, "Here, do you want grandpa's tape measure?" And at first I was like, yeah, sure. And I find great comfort in this 40-year-old tape measure that's
It's really
rusty,
interesting.
but it is something that is very practical, that when I pull out, um, I feel grandpa near me and
Mm.
seeing that. So it
That's
is,
interesting.
yeah. Um, and Linda often says, um, her dad's name was Raymond, and her mother's name was Margaret, and she would say, Ray and Margaret would love being here today, and we will
Mm.
go, well, they are, but it is. Um, they really loved family, as did my mom and my dad. So, and luckily, my mom's still with me. But
Mm.
we do that. That when you're all together again, um, you get the and and there's a wonderful story, Callsuma, that when Bruce toured, the first tour after Clarence died, and Clarence was such an icon. It was strange when they lost Danny, who was the organ player, but when you lost Clarence, he was such part of the E Street Band. He was such this
Mm.
big presence. They call him the big man, right? And
Mm.
he was Bruce's foil on stage. And so when they toured without him, there was a lot of discussion, can we tour without Clarence? And so the first tour they did after, they actually had, like four horn players to instead of just one horn player, Clarence and the
Wow.
clarinet. Yeah. And there was this at one point in the set list, the first time they played, um, he they did City of Ruins, and
Mm.
they do roll call,
Mm.
and they name every band member. right? Like, on horns, blank, blank, blank,
Yeah.
on background vocals, blank, 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 on bass, Gary Talent, on drums, Max Weinberg, and they go through. And at the end of it, Bruce looks out at the crowd and says, "Are we missing anyone? Are we missing
Yeah.
anybody?" And
Yeah.
they start cheering, "Are we
Yeah.
missing anybody?" And then, "Are we missing anybody?" And then he says, "Well, I know this. If you're here and we're here, they're here."
That's lovely. I love it.
And I started crying because
Yeah.
they had broadcasted over the radio. It was on E Street Radio. And I was lucky enough they did that for the first leg of the tour. He would play that song and he would say that to everyone. Um, and I think about that, and I don't know if you have a big family or not.
I
But I
do.
have a pretty big extended family, and so when everyone's there and you're everyone's cooked meals and you're there and you're laughing, I think of that. Well, if we're here and they're here, if you're here and we're here, they're here,
Mm.
and their spirit of those we've lost are still with us.
Mm. And that's really important, I think, to have that network and that family system, or if you don't have family, friends, maybe. I know lots of people say their family or their friends, so that you can explore and hold space and have that feeling of, well, if you're there, they're here. Um, but I just want to acknowledge that sometimes people have estrangements in their family, even if they do
Yeah.
have big families or small families, and I think that's really important part of the healing process, to have
Yes.
that support, because otherwise it doesn't feel like that when you are there that they're here, because that support isn't there, without trying to turn this into a negative thing. It's
No,
just,
no, no. I agree.
yeah, that is quite common as well, because I know what it's like when I do get family support, and we cook these big meals, right, during
Yeah.
the holidays, and you're recreating something that was passed on by your grandparents and your parents, and that's really important to be able to sustain that. It really does help with the grief process. I've always believed in that, but many have commented it's hard to recreate something like that, because sometimes in grief it can divide your families, and there can be estrangement, or people didn't have families, and you never can recreate that. But that is really important, and I think that it's nice that we reiterate that, if you're here, then they're here with you. I think that's lovely, and I think we should strive for that as much as possible, really.
I do, and I do understand that sometimes there is this um, grief, and once again, as we talked about, everyone grieves a different way, and
Mm,
sometimes you lash out in pain to those people that are feeling the same pain,
mm,
and either through um, because of um, material things that possibly, well, I wanted that, or I wanted that, or
mm.
things like that. It's sad. I do need to lighten the mood just a little bit.
Yeah, of
um,
course.
there I love the fact that you kept your dad's phone number in your system, though I'm going to tell you a um, my father had died in 2011, and
Mm.
he lived in Kentucky, and so all of us had gone up to Kentucky for 2 or 3 days to arrange the funeral, kind of help my mom clean out the house. They were still married, but they lived in separate um, homes. Like, she lived in Louisiana because she didn't want to be away from Louisiana, and he lived in Kentucky because he hated Louisiana. And
Okay.
so it was a very, it worked for them, but it's kind of weird. So I'm driving in the car, and all of a sudden my cell phone lights up and it says "Dad,"
Oh,
and I'm like,
Vicky,
Holy blank,"
moly.
right?
Mm.
And I'm like, "Hello?" And it's Mom. "Hey, I'm wondering, can you pick up some soda?" Like, "Mom, what are you doing?" "Well, my phone was dead, so I'm just using your dad's phone."
Oh my God, that's
Like,
hilarious.
don't do that. What are you? It was
That's hilarious.
it just, it was just a practical thing for her. Oh, his phone still got a charge. Let me call it. But
Yeah.
totally freaked me out. Like, why is dad calling me?
That would have
So
freaked me out, to be honest.
exactly, absolutely. Um,
Oh,
you
can
know,
I just say,
please.
I just want to say, I love the story about the tape measure, and I'm not just saying this because my dad had a toolbox, right, and he had a tape measure that was like
Yeah,
40 years old as well, and I kept that, and I still use it as well when I'm putting streamers up to measure walls and stuff, because my dad was good with his hands. He was like an engineer and worked in factories and
yeah.
stuff. So I just wanted to say I somewhat relate to that, and I love the tape measure story. I know that maybe for some listeners a bit odd, but that tape measure also brought me comfort. I still have it on my kitchen shelf. But yeah, I love that. I love that you shared that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, you are very welcome. Yeah, it's the idea that and often people will pass down Bibles and other things. Though I did, um, speaking of grief, we were at my mom's house a few years ago, and she brought out all these books
Mm.
that had been at the funeral home of the different family members.
Oh
How
wow.
there's a book you sign.
Mm.
And she's like, Jesse Wayne, because that's what I'm Jesse Wayne to her. Because my dad was Jesse Joel Jackson and I'm Jesse Wayne Jackson. So I'm Jesse Wayne to her. She's like, Jesse Wayne, do you want these? And I'm looking at her like, I don't want to hurt her feelings, but I have no, because it's just a book of signatures. It
Mm.
isn't people writing things about dad, it's just signatures. And it
Mm.
just felt, at this point, I didn't want it. And so I'm like, no, 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 it's too early. And so I don't know. Have you ever watched the show The Sopranos?
Oh yes, a long time ago now.
Okay.
It's been a while, yeah.
So there's a scene early where um, Tony's mother,
Mm.
he's trying to get her to go to a retirement community.
Yes,
And
yeah.
she says, take this lamp. And he goes, we're good on lamps, Mom. We're fine on lamps. And so when we got in the car, Chris goes, yeah, we're good on death books, Mimi. We don't need um and I know that that's part of her grieving process. Getting ready
Mm.
is getting things to us,
Yeah,
but
of course.
sometimes you're like, you're still here. I don't need to go through this. So it's
Yeah.
very, very interesting.
Mm.
Um,
Timing is everything with these things. You got to be ready, right?
yes, you do.
Yeah.
Um, so you've already started recording some for season 3.
Yes, I have started recording. Some episodes are scheduled in, and yeah, it's going to be an exciting one. People are anticipating it because it was funded by the community. So
Oh, that's nice. That's
yeah.
really good. I think I in a lot of ways, right? This is an honor to both your mom and dad.
Oh, absolutely. It's a privilege. It really is because, I'm honoring their memory, I'm honoring our experiences, and to be able to hold space for others so that they can also honor their parents and have their grief witnessed. That's so important, right? And
It is.
I would never have got that in a 9 to 5 job or any other setting. Doing something like this, it feels like a real privilege. It's like traveling around the world. Um, you just wouldn't get that from going to work.
Yes.
I've never experienced what I've experienced on the bereavement room and creating this space. So yeah, I feel like so many people have been honored in that space. So yeah.
I think that's such a blessing, and it's such I think it's you're doing a very powerful um, work for good. I think this is a true grace. I mean, I think you are showing grace to others and helping, and I'm just really proud to call you my friend.
Oh, thank you, Jesse. I'm so glad we met.
I
That's
am
so
too.
sweet. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I love chatting with you. And it came from the heart, and these
Yes.
things have to come from the heart.
They
So thank
absolutely.
you.
Remind people how they can find the podcast.
Oh yeah, sure. So everyone, if you want to give Bereavement Room a listen, you can find it on any podcast channel, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, wherever you like to listen. There's 2 full seasons up there. If you want to give it a follow on social media to have a listen to short clips, you can find most of the short clips on Twitter or Instagram. The handle is @Bereavement Room.
Good. And your personal Twitter?
Oh, my personal Twitter, if you want to follow my opinions, it's at Callsuma Ali.
Yes. Cosima, this was so much fun. I appreciate it. I love that you enjoyed hearing Bruce's latest album and the share. I don't know if you've had a chance yet, but he and Barack Obama are doing a podcast, and it's it's on Spotify. I hope it's available in the UK. They've been telling some great stories.
Oh wow, that's a force,
Yes.
Great duo, great duo.
Yeah, you're like, wow, like okay, here we go. Yeah, it's really funny. They tell in the very first episode that Bruce had done a fundraiser for him, a concert, but they didn't really get to meet till afterwards, and they started talking. And he says what worked most is Michelle really liked Patty. And he said
Yeah.
he would get all the time. Michelle would go, "You need to spend more time with Bruce because Bruce gets it. Patty has trained him well. You need to spend more time with Bruce."
Love it.
And so it is so funny hearing these two from very different backgrounds,
Mm.
talk and share. So it's a very, really cool podcast. So you should check that out.
Oh yeah, definitely will do. And I just want to say on the back of that,
Yeah.
behind every man is a great woman. So,
Absolutely. I
you
have
know.
no doubt. My beautiful, lovely bride Linda is keeps me on the straight and narrow, and is truly someone who keeps it going.
I
So
can
well
tell.
said. Um, Thank you so much. I am so excited about the new season. I know you are going to do so much good and share healing and love in the world. And I'm so glad that you joined me today to share and help promote it. Let's talk again. We'll find an excuse to talk sometime.
Oh yeah, for
It sounds
sure.
great. Yes.
For sure. Thank you for your kindness.
Oh, it's so welcome. Listeners, you stay safe. Remember to wash your hands. Remember to social distance. Ignore the governor of Texas and wear a mask. And let's all be good to each other because that's the only way we're going to get through this.
Absolutely.
For now, thank you, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye everyone.
Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.